Alina Marsh saw him the moment she stepped through the ballroom doors, and her heart dropped into her stomach like a stone into cold water. Derek Coleman stood near the champagne table, laughing at something, his eyes already scanning the crowd the way a hawk scans a field. She had not seen him in 8 months. 8 months since she had run from his apartment in the middle of the night with nothing but her coat and her car keys. 8 months of therapy, of changing her phone number, of jumping at shadows. And now, out of every gala in the city, he was here, at the same event she had been hired to help coordinate. Her hands began to shake. The clipboard she was holding nearly slipped from her fingers. She told herself to breathe, to think, to move, but her feet felt nailed to the marble floor. Derek's eyes swept past a cluster of guests and landed, for one terrible second, directly on her. His smile widened in a way that made her stomach turn. He started walking toward her. Alina spun on her heel, desperate for any way out, and that was when she saw a tall man standing alone near a pillar, holding a drink he did not seem interested in. She did not know him. She did not care. In one motion, without thinking, without asking permission, she closed the distance between them and pressed herself against his side, wrapping both arms around one of his and burying her face against his shoulder as if they had known each other for years. "Please," she whispered, so quietly only he could hear. "Please just play along. There is a man behind me, and I need him to think I am with someone." For a heartbeat, the stranger went completely still. She felt the muscles in his arm tense beneath her grip, and she was certain he was about to push her away, to ask loudly what on earth she thought she was doing, to make a scene that would be far worse than anything Derek could do. Instead, something unexpected happened. His free hand came up and settled gently at the small of her back, and he turned his body slightly, angling them both so that her face was hidden from the rest of the room. "Look up at me and laugh," he murmured, his voice low and steady, carrying no trace of alarm. "Whoever he is, he needs to believe this is nothing unusual." Alina tilted her head back, forced a smile onto her face, and let out a soft laugh that did not feel real but sounded convincing enough. Over the stranger's shoulder, she watched Derek slow his approach, his confident stride faltering as he took in the sight of her wrapped so intimately around another man. He hesitated at the edge of the small circle of space around them, his jaw tightening, and for a moment Alina feared he would push forward anyway. He had never cared much for boundaries. But the stranger, without even glancing at Derek, lifted his glass in an easy, unbothered gesture, the kind of gesture that belonged to a man who owned every room he walked into. It was such a small thing, yet it seemed to say everything. "This woman is with me. There is nothing here for you." Derek's eyes flicked between them one more time, and then, to Alina's overwhelming relief, he turned and walked away toward the bar, swallowed back into the crowd. She did not move. She could not quite believe it had worked. Her whole body was trembling, adrenaline draining out of her all at once, leaving her legs weak and her breath uneven. The stranger seemed to notice, because his hand at her back pressed a little firmer, steadying her without drawing attention to it. "He's gone," he said quietly. "You can breathe now." Alina finally lifted her head and looked at him properly for the first time. He was younger than she had expected, maybe mid-30s, with sharp features and calm gray eyes that studied her with more curiosity than judgment. His dark suit was clearly expensive, tailored to fit him perfectly, and there was something in the way he carried himself, an ease, a quiet authority that made her suddenly aware of how strange her behavior must have looked. "I am so sorry," she said quickly, stepping back and putting a careful distance between them. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment. "I should not have done that. I did not even ask you. I just saw him and I panicked, and you were the closest person, and I am so sorry. That was completely inappropriate of me." "You do not need to apologize," he said, and there was no irritation in his voice at all, only a faint, genuine warmth. "You looked like you needed help. I was happy to provide it." Alina let out a shaky breath, pressing her fingers to her forehead. "Still, I grabbed a complete stranger in the middle of a party and pretended we were together. That is not exactly normal behavior." "Normal is overrated," he said simply, and there was the ghost of a smile at the corner of his mouth. "Are you all right? You are still shaking." She looked down at her own hands and realized he was right. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to steady the tremor. I will be. He is someone from my past. Someone I really did not want to see tonight, especially not here, not while I am working. Working. I help plan events like this one, she explained, gesturing vaguely at the ballroom around them, the string quartet in the corner, the towers of white flowers, the waiters moving silently between clusters of wealthy guests. I am supposed to be checking on the dinner service right now, not causing scenes. I would not call that a scene, he said. I would call it self-preservation. There is a difference. Something about the calm certainty in his voice settled some of the panic still buzzing under her skin. She studied him for a moment, taking in the quiet confidence of his posture, the way people around them kept glancing his way, as if aware of him even from a distance. I don't think I caught your name, she said. Alexander, he said simply. Elena, she offered in return and shook his offered hand, which felt strange after what they had just done, shaking hands after pretending to be a couple. It made her laugh, a small, surprised sound, the first genuine laugh she had managed all evening. This is a strange way to meet someone. I have had stranger evenings, Alexander said, and there was something in his tone that suggested he meant it. Before she could ask what he meant, a man in a formal black coat approached them, walking with the brisk purpose of someone used to navigating crowded rooms on behalf of someone important. He stopped a respectful distance away and inclined his head slightly. Your Grace, the mayor has been asking for you. He would like a word before the speeches begin. Elena felt the words land like a splash of cold water. Your Grace. She turned slowly to look at Alexander, who suddenly seemed to be bracing himself, as though he already knew what was coming. Your Grace, she repeated, her voice faint. The man in the black coat, apparently unaware he had said anything remarkable, only nodded politely toward Elena before continuing. The Duke of Ashcombe is required in the East Gallery whenever he is ready. Elena's mouth fell open. She looked from the assistant to Alexander and back again, waiting for someone to tell her this was a joke, that she had misheard, that there was some other explanation. But the assistant only bowed slightly and stepped back to wait, and Alexander was watching her with an expression that was somewhere between amusement and apology. You are a duke, she said slowly, as if saying it aloud might make it less true. I am, he admitted. An actual duke, like a real one, with a title and land and everything that goes with it. That is generally how it works, yes. Elena felt her face go hot with a fresh wave of horror. She had grabbed a duke. She had thrown herself against the arm of one of the wealthiest, most prominent men in the country, and pretended to be his date in front of half the city's elite, and he had simply gone along with it, calm as anything, as if strange women clinging to him in ballrooms was an everyday occurrence. I am going to go stand somewhere very far away from you now, she said, already backing up, mortification blooming across every inch of her skin. I am so sorry. I did not know. I would never have, I did not mean to. Oh my goodness, I need to go check on the dinner service. She turned to flee, certain that was the end of it, that she would spend the rest of the night hiding in the kitchen, praying no one had noticed the woman who had mistaken a duke for a convenient shield. But before she could take more than 2 steps, a hand closed gently around her wrist, not forceful, not commanding, just enough to make her pause. Wait, Alexander said. She turned back, bracing herself for whatever came next, an angry word, a warning to be more careful in the future, anything. Instead, he was looking at her with an expression she could not quite place, something curious, something almost hopeful. You did not know who I was, he said slowly, as though testing the idea out loud. No, she said, bewildered. Should I have? I am sorry, I do not really follow society pages or anything like that. I just do the flowers and the seating charts. For the first time all evening, Alexander laughed, a real laugh, low and surprised, as though something about her answer delighted him more than anything he had heard in weeks. Do you have any idea how rare that is? What, not recognizing you? Precisely that. He released her wrist but did not step away. Most people in this room know exactly who I am before they even say hello. Most people in this room are here specifically because of who I am. You grabbed my arm because you needed help, and you had absolutely no idea it would matter to your reputation whether I said yes or not. That is refreshing in ways I do not think I can properly explain to you right now." Alina did not know what to say to that. She stood there, still faintly trembling from the encounter with Derek, still reeling from the discovery that she had used a Duke as an emergency shield, unsure whether she was supposed to feel relieved or even more embarrassed. "I really do need to go check on the dinner service," she said finally, weakly, because it was true, and because she needed a reason to escape before she said something even more foolish. Alexander studied her for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted, sharpened, as though he had just made a decision. "Alina," he said, "before you go, that man tonight. Is he someone I should be concerned about?" The question caught her off guard, mostly because of how sincerely he asked it. No performance in his voice, no polite formality, just quiet concern from a man who had known her for less than 10 minutes. "He is someone I used to know," she said carefully. "It ended badly. That is all I really want to say about it tonight." Alexander nodded slowly, accepting the boundary without pushing against it, which surprised her almost as much as everything else that had happened. "Understood," he said. "But if he bothers you again tonight or any other night, you come find me. I mean that." "You do not even know me." "No," he agreed. "But you trusted me enough to grab my arm in front of half the city, and I would like to earn that trust properly instead of letting it be an accident." Before she could respond, his assistant cleared his throat politely from a few feet away, a gentle reminder that the mayor was waiting. Alexander gave her one last look, something warm and unreadable, and then allowed himself to be led away toward the East Gallery, leaving Alina standing alone near the pillar, her heart still pounding, though now for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. She pressed a hand to her chest and let out a long, unsteady breath. Around her, the party continued exactly as it had before, string quartet playing, waiters gliding past with silver trays, laughter rising and falling in easy waves. No one seemed to have noticed the strange, quiet drama that had just unfolded near the pillar. No one except, perhaps, the man in gray eyes who had just walked away looking, for reasons she could not explain, almost reluctant to go. Alina made her way toward the kitchen doors on unsteady legs, forcing herself to focus on the tasks in front of her, the dinner service, the seating chart, the small details that made an event run smoothly. But even as she checked in with the catering staff and smoothed a wrinkle in a tablecloth, her mind kept circling back to the same two thoughts, tangled together in a way she did not fully understand. Derek had found her again. And somehow, in the middle of that fear, she had stumbled into the arms of a duke who had not run away. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of practiced professionalism. Alina checked place settings, coordinated with the string quartet about timing, and kept half an eye on the room in case Derek reappeared, though he did not. Perhaps the Duke's simple gesture had been enough to send a clear message, or perhaps Derek had simply lost interest once his target seemed unreachable. Either way, she did not see him again for the rest of the night, and slowly, gradually, her heartbeat returned to something close to normal. Near the end of the evening, as guests began drifting toward the exits and the catering staff started clearing the last of the dessert plates, Alina found herself near the grand staircase, double-checking a list on her clipboard, when she felt a familiar presence approach. "You survived the evening," Alexander said, coming to stand beside her, his tone light but his eyes searching her face carefully, as if checking for any lingering signs of distress. "So did you," she replied. "I heard the mayor talks a lot." "You have no idea." He glanced around the emptying ballroom, then back at her. "I wanted to apologize, actually." Alina blinked. "For what? You did nothing wrong tonight. If anything, you saved me from a very uncomfortable conversation. For letting you walk away earlier without properly introducing myself, titles and formality aside. I would like to know your name without a stranger having grabbed your arm as the reason we met." She could not help the small smile that tugged at her lips. "You already know my name is Alina." Elena what? Marsh, she said. Elena Marsh. Well, Elena Marsh, he said, and there was something warm in the careful, deliberate way he said her full name. I do not suppose you would allow me to walk you to your car. It is late, and after everything that happened tonight, I would feel better knowing you got there safely. Elena hesitated, the events of the evening still fresh, still tangled with fear and relief, and a confusion she did not have a name for yet. But there was nothing pushy in his offer, nothing that made her want to refuse out of caution. Just quiet, steady concern from a man who, despite his title and his wealth and the entire world that surrounded him, had looked at her all evening as though she were simply a person, not an inconvenience, not a stranger to be tolerated, but someone worth paying attention to. All right, she said finally, thank you. As they walked together toward the entrance, past the last lingering guests and the glittering chandeliers, Elena could not shake the strange, dizzying feeling that her life had just shifted onto a different path entirely, one she had not chosen and could not yet see the shape of. She had come to this gala expecting nothing more than another long night of work. She had not expected to run from her past. She had not expected to find shelter in the arms of a duke. And she certainly had not expected, as they stepped out into the cool night air together, to feel something other than fear settle over her for the first time in months. Something that felt, cautiously, dangerously like hope. 3 days after the gala, Elena sat in her small office above the flower shop she used for event supplies, staring at her phone as it buzzed against the desk for the 4th time in an hour. She did not recognize the number, but something about the persistence of the calls made her stomach tighten with a familiar dread. She let it ring out again, then finally, unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, she answered. Elena, it has been a while. Derek's voice slid through the phone like oil, smooth and unbothered, exactly as she remembered it. She closed her eyes and gripped the edge of her desk. How did you get this number? She asked, keeping her voice as steady as she could manage. I have my ways, he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice, the same smile that used to make her feel special once back before she understood what it actually meant. I saw you at the gala the other night, cozy with the Duke, were you? Didn't take you long to move up in the world. That is none of your business, she said, her hand trembling slightly around the phone. Everything about you is my business, sweetheart. You do not just walk away from 3 years without consequences. His tone shifted, hardening at the edges, the charm draining out of it and leaving something colder underneath. I know people, Elena. I know people who know your new Duke friend. It would be a shame if certain things about your past found their way into the wrong ears, wouldn't it? Things about why you really left in such a hurry. Elena's blood ran cold. There was nothing shameful in her past, nothing but lies Derek had threatened to spread before, twisted stories designed to make her look unstable, difficult, ungrateful, anything but the truth of what he had actually done to her. She had spent months rebuilding her sense of safety, and now, with a single phone call, he was threatening to tear it all down again. Leave me alone, Derek, she said, forcing steel into her voice even as her hands shook. I am not afraid of you anymore. We will see about that, he said, and the line went dead. Elena set the phone down slowly, her breath coming in short, uneven pulls. She sat there for a long moment, staring at the wall, feeling the familiar weight of fear settle back onto her shoulders, a weight she thought she had finally started to shed. She hated how quickly it came back, how one phone call could undo months of careful healing. Her phone buzzed again, and she flinched before realizing it was a different number entirely, one she did recognize this time, saved just 2 days earlier under a single name. Alexander. She hesitated before answering, unsure whether she had the strength for another conversation so soon after Derek's call, but something about the timing felt significant, as though the universe were offering her a choice between 2 very different paths. Hello, she said, trying to keep her voice light. Elena, it is Alexander. I hope I am not calling at a bad time. No, it is fine, she said, and then, because she was still rattled and had not yet learned to hide it well, actually, it has been a strange morning. What happened? She almost brushed the question aside, out of habit, out of the instinct to handle everything herself rather than burden someone else with her problems. But there was something in the genuine concern of his voice that made her pause, made her consider, for the first time in a long while, that she did not have to carry everything alone. "Derek called me," she admitted. "The man from the gala. He got my number somehow, and he made some threats. Nothing I cannot handle, probably just talk, but it rattled me." There was a pause on the line, and when Alexander spoke again, his voice had changed, quieter, more serious. "What kind of threats?" "He said he knows people who know you. He implied he could spread lies about me, ruin my reputation, make things difficult." She let out a shaky breath. "It is probably nothing. He likes to talk big." "It is not nothing if it frightened you," Alexander said firmly. "Alina, I would like to help if you will let me." "You already helped enough the other night." "That was one evening. This sounds like something that will not simply disappear because he did not get his way at a party." His voice softened. "I have a proposal for you, and I want you to hear the whole thing before you decide anything." Alina leaned back in her chair, curiosity mixing with wariness. "I am listening." "There is a season of events coming up. Charity dinners, gallery openings, a few weddings among family friends, the sort of thing that comes with being who I am. Every single one of them comes with people trying to introduce me to their daughters, their nieces, their business partners' granddaughters, all of it exhausting in ways I do not think I can fully explain unless you have lived it." He paused. "I would like you to attend these events with me. As my girlfriend in appearance only, an arrangement between the two of us. In exchange, I will make sure Derek understands very clearly that threatening you carries consequences he does not want to face." Alina sat in stunned silence for a long moment. "You want to pretend to date me?" "I want to solve two problems at once," he said. "You need protection from someone who clearly will not stop on his own. I need a reason to stop fielding marriage proposals from women who care more about my title than they do about me. It benefits us both, and it costs neither of us anything real." "This sounds like the plot of a very strange movie," Alina said, though a small, disbelieving laugh escaped her despite herself. "I am aware of how it sounds," Alexander said, and she could hear the faint smile in his voice. "But I promise you I am completely serious. You would not have to do anything you are uncomfortable with. We could set whatever boundaries you like. It would simply be an arrangement of convenience, nothing more, unless at some point you decided you wanted it to be something more." Something about that last part lingered oddly in her chest, though she pushed the thought aside quickly, unwilling to examine it too closely. "Why me?" she asked finally. "You could ask anyone, someone who actually knows how to move through your world without embarrassing you." "Alina," he said, his voice quiet and certain, "you did not know who I was when you grabbed my arm. You have not asked me a single question about my money or my estate since we met. You spent our entire conversation at the gala more worried about apologizing to me than impressing me. Do you have any idea how long it has been since someone treated me like that?" She did not have an answer for that. She sat quietly, turning his words over, feeling the pull of an offer that both frightened her, and in some strange way she did not fully trust, appealed to her more than she wanted to admit. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "Take all the time you need," he said. "But Alina, whatever you decide about the arrangement, I meant what I said about Derek. If he contacts you again, I want you to tell me immediately. That part of my offer does not depend on your answer." After they hung up, Alina sat at her desk for a long time, staring out the window at the street below, watching people move through their ordinary lives, unaware of the strange decision unfolding above them. She thought about the months she had spent rebuilding herself after Derek, learning to trust her own judgment again, learning that safety was something she could create rather than something that depended entirely on someone else's mercy. She thought about how frightened she had felt just an hour earlier, hearing his voice on the phone, and how something in her had shrunk back into old patterns of fear before she could stop it. And she thought about Alexander, steady and calm in a ballroom full of strangers, lifting his glass without hesitation, choosing without a moment's doubt to shield her from a threat he did not even understand yet. There had been nothing performative in it, nothing that suggested he was doing it for attention or advantage. He had simply seen someone who needed help and offered it, the same way he was offering it now. She called Grace that evening, her closest friend since college, the one person who had stood beside her through every terrible month after Derek, helping her pack boxes in the middle of the night, sitting with her through the worst of the panic attacks, never once making her feel foolish for how long it had taken to leave. "He wants you to what?" Grace said, her voice climbing half an octave through the phone. "Pretend to date him," Alina said, pacing her small apartment as she explained the whole strange arrangement. "In exchange for protection from Derek and some social cover for both of us. It is not real. It is just appearances." "Alina," Grace's voice had gone very careful, "this is either the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard, or the beginning of an extremely dramatic story you will tell at your wedding someday." "It is not going to be a wedding, Grace. It is a business arrangement." "Sure it is." Alina could practically hear her friend's eyebrows rising through the phone. "Okay, but seriously, forget the Duke part for a second. Focus on the actual problem. Derek is escalating. He got your number. He is making threats. That is not something you should be handling alone, arrangement or no arrangement." "I know," Alina admitted quietly. "That is the part that actually scares me." "Then let the man help you," Grace said gently. "I'm not saying fall in love with a duke, Alina, though frankly at this point I would not blame you. I am saying if someone with real resources and real willingness is offering to help you deal with someone who has been terrorizing you for months, do not let pride or fear talk you out of it." Alina sat with that advice for the rest of the night, turning it over alongside everything else. The fear, the strange flutter of hope, the memory of Alexander's steady voice on the phone insisting he meant what he said. By the time she finally fell asleep, she had not yet made her decision, but something in her had already begun to shift. Some old, stubborn wall starting to crack just slightly under the weight of an offer she had not expected and could not quite bring herself to refuse. The next morning, she called him back before she had even finished her coffee, before she could talk herself out of it again. "I have some conditions," she said the moment he answered. She could hear the smile return to his voice immediately. "I am listening. No lying to anyone about anything important. If people ask how we met, we tell them the truth, more or less, minus the part where I mistook you for a stranger I could hide behind." "Agreed. And if at any point either of us wants to end the arrangement, we end it. No hard feelings, no complications." "Agreed," he said again, though something in his tone suggested he was already imagining a scenario where that particular condition might prove more difficult than either of them expected. "Then yes," Alina said, taking a breath, feeling the strange, dizzying weight of the decision settle over her. "I will do it." "Alina," Alexander said, and there was real warmth in his voice now, unguarded in a way she had not heard from him before. "Thank you. I promise you will not regret this." She hoped as she hung up the phone and stared at the quiet morning light filling her apartment, that he was right. But some small, cautious part of her, the part that had learned the hard way how quickly things could go wrong, could not help wondering exactly what she had just agreed to, and how much of her heart she might end up risking along the way. The first official event of their arrangement was a charity dinner held at a restored manor house on the edge of the city, an evening meant to raise money for a children's hospital wing that Alexander's family had funded for generations. Alina stood in front of her closet for nearly an hour that afternoon, trying on and discarding outfit after outfit, more nervous than she cared to admit for something that was, according to every rule she herself had set, not actually real. She finally settled on a deep green dress, simple but well made, nothing that screamed for attention but nothing that would embarrass her either. When the car Alexander sent arrived outside her apartment, she took one long breath before stepping out to meet it, reminding herself that this was a performance, nothing more, a favor exchanged for safety. Alexander was waiting for her at the entrance of the manor house, and the moment he saw her step out of the car, something shifted across his face, a quiet appreciation he did not bother to hide. "You look wonderful," he said simply, offering his arm. "Thank you," she said, looping her arm through his, trying to ignore the way her heart gave an unexpected little leap at the contact. "You look like you belong on the cover of a magazine, which I assume you are used to hearing." "Not from people who mean it as a joke," he said, and the corner of his mouth twitched with amusement as they walked inside together. The manor house was breathtaking, all soaring ceilings and gleaming chandeliers, the kind of place Alina had only ever seen from behind a clipboard, coordinating logistics rather than attending as a guest. Tonight, though, she was on Alexander's arm, and the difference in how people treated her was almost dizzying. Waiters who might have overlooked her at any other event now offered trays the moment she came near. Guests who would never have spared her a glance now leaned in eagerly, introducing themselves, asking polite questions about her work, her background, how she and the Duke had met. "We met at a gala a few weeks ago," Alexander said smoothly, whenever the question arose, sticking carefully to the agreement they had made. "She made quite an impression on me." Alina found herself relaxing more than she expected as the evening went on, settling into an easy rhythm beside him, the two of them trading quiet, private jokes about the more pompous guests, Alexander leaning down occasionally to murmur some dry observation that made her fight back laughter in the middle of otherwise formal conversations. It did not feel like a performance at all, not most of the time. It felt strangely like being herself in a world that had never had room for her before. Near the end of the evening, as the crowd thinned and the string quartet shifted into slower, quieter pieces, an older woman approached them with sharp, assessing eyes and silver hair swept into an elegant twist. Alina recognized the resemblance immediately, the same steady gray eyes, the same composed posture. "Mother," Alexander said, his tone carefully neutral in a way that told Alina volumes about their relationship. "This is Alina Marsh. Alina, my mother, the Duchess." "Charmed," the Duchess said, though her expression suggested the opposite. Her gaze swept over Alina from head to toe with the practiced efficiency of someone evaluating a purchase. "Marsh, I do not believe I know the family." "There is not much to know," Alina said, keeping her voice pleasant despite the flicker of discomfort curling in her stomach. "My family runs a small flower business a few hours from here. I coordinate event logistics for a living." Something in the Duchess's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "How industrious," she said, in a tone that made the word sound like an insult. She turned to her son. "Alexander, might I have a word with you privately?" "Whatever you would like to say, you can say in front of Alina," Alexander said, his voice calm but firm, an edge of steel beneath the politeness. The Duchess's lips pressed into a thin line, but she seemed to reconsider whatever argument she had been preparing, at least for the moment. "We will speak later," she said instead, and with one more assessing glance toward Alina, she turned and glided away into the crowd. "I am sorry about that," Alexander said once she was out of earshot, his jaw still tight with lingering tension. "It is fine," Alina said, though her hands had curled slightly at her sides. "I knew what I was signing up for when I agreed to this. Not everyone is going to be thrilled about a duke showing up with someone who is not exactly aristocracy." "That does not make it acceptable," he said. "My mother has opinions about who I should spend my time with, opinions that have very little to do with the actual person standing in front of her. I do not intend to let those opinions dictate how you are treated tonight or any other night." Something about the fierce certainty in his voice settled warmly in her chest, and she found herself studying him for a long moment, wondering how a man born into so much privilege had managed to hold onto so much genuine decency. "Can I ask you something?" she said as they found a quieter corner near the terrace doors, away from the thickest part of the crowd. "Of course. Why does it matter to you so much? What people like your mother think or say or want for you? You are a duke. Could you not simply do whatever you wanted regardless of anyone's approval?" Alexander was quiet for a moment, considering the question with more seriousness than she expected. "It is not that simple," he said finally. "Titles come with obligations, expectations tied to centuries of tradition, family reputation, alliances that stretch back generations. My mother genuinely believes that who I marry will determine the future stability of everything our family has built. I do not agree with everything she believes, but I understand where it comes from, even when it frustrates me. That sounds exhausting, Alina said honestly. It is, he admitted, a rare note of weariness slipping into his voice. Which is part of why our arrangement has been such a relief. For the first time in longer than I can remember, I am spending an evening with someone who is not evaluating me as a strategic opportunity. You have no idea how rare that feels. Alina looked out at the manicured gardens beyond the terrace, lit softly by strings of small lights woven through the trees, and let his words settle over her. I am not evaluating you at all, honestly, she said. I am mostly just trying not to trip in these shoes. Alexander laughed, a real warm sound that seemed to loosen something in his shoulders. There it is, he said. That is exactly what I mean. They stood together on the terrace for a while longer, talking about nothing important, the kind of easy, unguarded conversation Alina had not realized she missed until she was in the middle of it. He asked about her work, genuinely curious rather than politely tolerant, asking follow-up questions about the logistics of coordinating large events. The details most people found boring, but which she found endlessly satisfying. She asked about his own work, the charitable trusts he oversaw, the land management responsibilities that came with his title, the parts of his life that had nothing to do with parties or headlines. By the time the car arrived to take her home, hours later than either of them had expected, Alina realized with some surprise that she had not thought about Derek even once for the entire second half of the evening. "Thank you for tonight," Alexander said as he walked her to the car, his voice quieter now that they were alone. "I know my mother did not exactly make things easy." "She is protective of you," Alina said. "I cannot really fault her for that, even if her methods leave something to be desired. You are more forgiving of her than she deserves." "Maybe," Alina said with a small shrug. "Or maybe I just understand what it is like to be scared of the wrong things happening to the people you love." Something shifted in Alexander's expression at that, something quieter and more thoughtful than the easy warmth he had shown all evening. "Alina," he said, "may I ask you something personal? You do not have to answer if you would rather not." She nodded slowly, bracing herself. "That man, Derek, what did he do to you?" Alina's stomach tightened, old instincts urging her to deflect, to change the subject, to protect the careful walls she had spent months building around that particular wound. But something about the quiet steadiness of Alexander's presence, the way he had asked without any trace of demand or judgment, made her want to answer honestly, at least in part. "He controlled everything," she said finally, her voice quieter than usual. "Where I went, who I talked to, what I wore. It happened so slowly I did not even realize it was happening until I looked up one day and realized I had no friends left who he had not driven away, no money of my own he did not have access to, no decisions in my own life that were actually mine. When I finally left, he made it very clear that leaving would have consequences. I have spent the better part of a year trying to believe that it will not." Alexander's expression darkened, though his voice remained gentle when he spoke. "It will not," he said firmly, "not while I have anything to say about it." "You cannot promise that," Alina said softly. "No," he agreed. "But I can promise you this. You will never face him alone again, not as long as our arrangement stands, and honestly, not after it ends either, if you will allow me to remain in your life in whatever capacity makes sense for you." Alina felt something tighten in her throat, a rush of emotion she had not expected and was not entirely sure how to name. "That is a big promise for someone you barely know," she managed. "Perhaps," Alexander said, opening the car door for her. "But I find that I already care what happens to you, Alina Marsh, arrangement or no arrangement. That is simply the truth of it." She slid into the car, and as it pulled away from the manor house, she looked back once to see him still standing there, watching until the car turned the corner and disappeared from view. She pressed a hand against her chest, feeling her heart beat unevenly beneath her palm, and admitted quietly to herself, for the first time, that whatever this arrangement had started as, it was beginning to feel like something else entirely. Over the following 2 weeks, their public arrangement settled into something that felt less like a performance and more like an actual friendship deepening by the day. They attended a gallery opening together, where Alexander patiently listened to Alina explain, with far more enthusiasm than she intended to reveal, exactly how difficult it was to coordinate lighting for an evening event without blowing the venue's entire electrical budget. They had dinner twice, quiet meals away from cameras and society pages, where they talked for hours about nothing important and everything that mattered: her childhood on her family's small flower farm, his early memories of a father who had died when he was young, leaving him a title and a set of responsibilities far too heavy for a boy who had not yet learned to carry them. Alina found herself looking forward to their conversations more than she wanted to admit, catching herself smiling at her phone when his name appeared on the screen, rearranging her schedule without quite realizing it to make sure she was free whenever he asked to see her. She told herself it was simply because their arrangement was working exactly as intended, that the ease between them was a byproduct of shared purpose rather than anything deeper. But late one evening, after a quiet dinner at a small restaurant tucked away from the busier parts of the city, as Alexander walked her to her door and paused at the threshold, neither of them quite ready to say good night, Alina caught herself wondering, with a small flutter of nervous hope, what it might feel like if he leaned down and kissed her. He did not that night. He simply squeezed her hand gently, told her he would see her soon, and walked back to his car with a lingering glance over his shoulder that made her breath catch in her throat. She closed her apartment door behind her and leaned against it for a long moment, pressing her fingers against her lips, trying to understand the strange, warm ache blooming in her chest. Somewhere along the way, without either of them quite intending it, the careful lines of their arrangement had begun to blur, and Alina was no longer entirely certain she wanted them to stay in place. The trouble began quietly, the way it always seemed to with Derek, small enough at first that Alina almost convinced herself she was imagining it. A client who had booked her for a wedding in the spring suddenly canceled without explanation, citing vague concerns about her professionalism. Then another client, one she had worked with for years, called to ask awkwardly whether there was any truth to a rumor circulating that Alina had been dismissed from a previous job for stealing from an employer. It was a lie, an ugly, baseless lie, but it spread quickly through the small, tightly connected world of event planning, the kind of world where reputation was everything and rumors, once seeded, were nearly impossible to fully uproot. Alina spent an entire weekend making phone calls, trying to trace the source of the story, her stomach twisting tighter with every conversation, until she finally reached a former colleague who admitted, reluctantly, that a man matching Derek's description had approached several people in the industry over the past week, spinning stories designed specifically to damage her credibility. She sat on her couch that Sunday evening, staring at her laptop screen, watching two more clients quietly cancel their bookings through polite, carefully worded emails that did not mention the rumors directly but made their implications clear enough. Years of careful work, of building a reputation one satisfied client at a time, were unraveling in the space of a single week, and there was nothing she could do to stop it fast enough. Her phone rang, and she answered it without checking the screen, too exhausted to care who was calling. Alina, Alexander's voice, warm and familiar, immediately eased some of the tension coiled in her shoulders, though it did not disappear entirely. "I have been trying to reach you all day. Is everything all right?" "Not really," she admitted. And then, because she was too tired to hide it any longer, she told him everything: the canceled bookings, the rumors, the calls from clients who no longer trusted her, the growing certainty that Derek had finally found a way to hurt her that did not require him to lay a single hand on her. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line when she finished. When Alexander finally spoke, his voice had gone hard in a way she had not heard from him before, quiet but unmistakably furious. "He is not going to get away with this," he said. Alexander, please, do not do anything that makes this worse, Alina said quickly, alarm cutting through her exhaustion. If you go after him, it could turn into a bigger story. And then it becomes about you and your reputation instead of just quietly disappearing on its own. Alina, he said, his tone gentling slightly, though the steel beneath it remained. Listen to me. This is not going to quietly disappear on its own. He is deliberately trying to destroy the career you built for yourself, and he is doing it because he knows it will hurt you more effectively than anything else he could do. I am not going to sit by and let that happen simply because I am worried about optics. What are you going to do? Exactly what I should have done the moment you told me his name, Alexander said. I am going to make certain that every single person he has spoken to understands the truth, and I am going to make certain he understands there will be consequences the next time he decides to spread lies about someone under my protection. Alina felt a complicated tangle of emotions rise in her chest, gratitude and relief tangled together with a stubborn thread of guilt, the old habit of believing she should be able to handle everything herself, that needing help was somehow a failure. You do not have to fix this for me, she said quietly. I know I do not have to, Alexander said. I want to. There is a difference, Alina, and I think somewhere along the way you stopped believing that people are capable of wanting to help you without expecting something in return. His words landed with more weight than he probably realized, striking directly at the wound Derek had left behind, the deep, quiet conviction that she was somehow a burden, that any kindness shown to her came with hidden strings attached. She closed her eyes, feeling tears prick unexpectedly at the corners. Thank you, she whispered. Over the following days, Alina watched, with a mixture of awe and disbelief, as Alexander moved through the situation with the same calm, deliberate confidence she had witnessed the night of the gala. He did not shout, did not make public spectacles, did not turn the situation into a media circus. Instead, he made a series of quiet, precise phone calls, meetings with key figures in the events industry who respected his family's long history of philanthropy and community involvement, gently but firmly correcting the record, explaining exactly who Alina was, and what her actual reputation had been before a bitter ex-partner decided to manufacture lies about her. Within a week, the rumors had largely evaporated. Two of the clients who had canceled reached out personally to apologize, embarrassed at having believed gossip without verifying it first, and offered to rebook their events with her. Alina's phone, which had gone eerily quiet during the worst of it, slowly began ringing again with new inquiries, several of them explicitly mentioning that they had heard about her professionalism and integrity through mutual connections in the industry. But it was the confrontation with Derek himself that Alina had not expected, the one Alexander did not tell her about until after it had already happened. She learned about it from Grace, who had heard through a mutual acquaintance that Derek had been seen leaving a private meeting looking pale and rattled, muttering to anyone nearby that he was done with the whole situation, that Alina was not worth the trouble anymore. When Alina confronted Alexander about it that evening, arriving at his townhouse unannounced, her arms crossed and her expression somewhere between grateful and frustrated, he did not try to deny it. I asked him to meet with me, Alexander admitted, standing in the doorway of his study, looking almost sheepish for the first time since she had known him. I made it very clear that if he ever contacted you again, spread another rumor about you, or came anywhere near you without your explicit invitation, he would find himself dealing with legal and financial consequences significant enough to make it very difficult for him to continue his current lifestyle. You threatened him. I informed him of facts, Alexander corrected mildly. Facts about the resources at my disposal, the lawyers I employ, and my willingness to use every single one of them on your behalf. Whether he chooses to interpret that as a threat is entirely his own business. Alina stood in the doorway, torn between the instinct to be annoyed that he had handled something so significant without consulting her first, and an overwhelming wave of gratitude so large it nearly buckled her knees. You could have told me before you did it, she said, though the fight had mostly gone out of her voice. I could have, Alexander agreed, stepping closer, his gray eyes searching her face carefully. But I was worried you would try to talk me out of it, and I was not willing to let him continue hurting you simply to avoid an uncomfortable conversation. I am sorry if that overstepped some line I should not have crossed. Alina looked up at him, at the quiet intensity in his expression, the way his jaw was still faintly tight with the lingering anger of confronting Derek on her behalf, and something in her chest cracked open, warm and unfamiliar and terrifying all at once. "No one has ever done something like that for me before," she said softly. "Not like that, not without wanting something in return." "I do not want anything in return," Alexander said, his voice low. "I only want you to be safe and happy. And to know, without any doubt, that you deserve both of those things." The space between them had narrowed without either of them quite noticing, and Alina found herself acutely aware of how close he was standing, of the warmth radiating from him, of the careful, restrained way he was looking at her, as though he wanted to close the remaining distance but was waiting for some sign from her that it would be welcome. "Alexander," she said quietly, her heart hammering. "Yes." She did not finish the sentence. Instead, she closed the small distance between them herself, rising slightly on her toes and pressed her lips gently to his. For a heartbeat, he went still with surprise, and then his arms came around her, careful and steady, pulling her closer as he kissed her back with a tenderness that made her chest ache with something she had not let herself feel in years. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Alexander rested his forehead gently against hers. "That was not part of the arrangement," he murmured, though there was no complaint in his voice, only quiet wonder. "No," Alina agreed, a small disbelieving laugh escaping her. "It really was not." "Do you regret it?" She considered the question seriously, searching her own heart for any trace of doubt, and found none. "No," she said. "I do not think I do." Alexander smiled, the kind of unguarded, genuine smile she had rarely seen from him, and pulled her into a gentle embrace, the two of them standing quietly together in the doorway of his study, the careful lines of their arrangement now thoroughly, irreversibly blurred. For 3 peaceful weeks after the kiss in his study doorway, Alina allowed herself to believe that the worst of Derek's interference had finally passed. Her business had recovered fully, new clients filling her calendar faster than she could manage them, and her relationship with Alexander, no longer bound by the careful pretense of an arrangement, had deepened into something real and steady, built on late-night phone calls, quiet dinners, and the growing, undeniable certainty that what they shared had nothing to do with convenience anymore. She should have known better than to let her guard down completely. It happened on a Thursday evening, ordinary in every way until it was not. Alina had stayed late at her office finishing invoices, and by the time she stepped out into the parking lot, the sky had gone fully dark, streetlights casting long shadows between the rows of parked cars. She had her keys already in hand, her mind still half occupied with wedding logistics for the following weekend, when a figure stepped out from between 2 cars directly into her path. Her heart lurched into her throat before she even fully registered who it was. "Alina," Derek said, his voice carrying none of the smooth charm from their phone calls, stripped down now to something rawer, angrier. "You have been avoiding me." "Get away from me," she said, her voice shaking despite her best effort to sound firm, her hand tightening around her keys, fingers instinctively finding the small canister of pepper spray she had started carrying months ago and had hoped, desperately, she would never actually need. "Do you have any idea what you have cost me?" Derek continued, stepping closer, ignoring her demand entirely. "Your Duke boyfriend had a very interesting conversation with several of my business associates. Contracts I have been working on for months gone just like that because he decided to make an example of me. This is your fault, Alina, all of it." "I did not ask him to do anything," Alina said, backing away slowly, her eyes darting toward her car, calculating the distance, the odds of reaching it before he closed the gap between them. "This is not my fault, Derek. Everything that has happened to you is a consequence of what you did to me, and what you tried to do again after I left." His expression twisted, something dark and unstable flashing across his face in the dim light of the parking lot. You think you can just walk away and destroy my life, and there will not be consequences. He took another step forward, faster now, closing the distance she had tried to maintain. You owe me an explanation. At the very least, you owe me that. I do not owe you anything, Alina said, her back now pressed against the cold metal of her car door, panic rising sharp and immediate in her chest. She fumbled behind her for the door handle, her fingers clumsy with fear, when Derek's hand shot out and gripped her wrist, hard enough to make her gasp. Let go of me, she said, her voice cracking, the pepper spray forgotten in her panic, every instinct screaming at her to fight, to run, to do something. But her body had gone rigid with fear in a way that felt sickeningly familiar, an old, learned helplessness she thought she had left behind months ago. Not until you listen to me, Derek said, his grip tightening. Headlights swept suddenly across the parking lot, and a car screeched to a stop only a few feet away, close enough that Derek startled and loosened his grip just slightly. The driver's door flew open, and Alexander was out of the car and across the pavement before Alina had fully registered his arrival, his expression carved from something cold and dangerous that she had never once seen on him before. Take your hand off her, Alexander said, his voice low and lethal in a way that made the hair on Alina's arms rise. Derek released her wrist immediately, stumbling back a step, his bravado visibly faltering in the face of Alexander's sudden, furious presence. This is between me and her, he said, though his voice had lost all its earlier confidence. It has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with me, Alexander said, stepping fully between Derek and Alina, his body a solid wall of protection. I told you what would happen if you came near her again. Did you think I was bluffing? I did not touch her, Derek said quickly, backing further away. I just wanted to talk. You had your hand around her wrist hard enough to leave a mark, Alexander said, his voice dropping even lower, dangerous in its quiet control. I have already been more patient with you than you deserve. That patience has now run out entirely. Derek's eyes flicked between Alexander and Alina, calculating, weighing his options, and whatever he saw in Alexander's expression seemed to convince him that continuing the confrontation would cost him far more than he was willing to pay. He took another step back, then another, before finally turning and walking quickly toward the far end of the parking lot, disappearing into the darkness without another word. The moment he was gone, Alexander turned immediately to Alina, his fierce, cold anger dissolving instantly into something soft and worried as he gently took her trembling hands in his. Are you hurt? He asked, his eyes scanning her face, her wrist, checking for any sign of injury. I am okay, Alina managed, though her voice shook badly, adrenaline still coursing hot and unsteady through her veins. I am okay, he just grabbed my wrist, that is all. That is not all, Alexander said, gently turning her wrist over to examine the faint red marks already beginning to bloom across her skin, his jaw tightening again at the sight of them. Alina, I am so sorry I was not here sooner. How did you even know to come? She asked, still trying to catch her breath. I did not, he admitted. I was driving to surprise you after work, and I saw your car still here later than usual, and something felt wrong. I am grateful I trusted that instinct. Alina leaned into him then, unable to hold back the tears that had been building since the moment Derek stepped into her path, and Alexander wrapped his arms around her fully, holding her steady while she shook against his chest, murmuring quiet reassurances into her hair until her breathing slowly began to even out. I am calling the authorities, Alexander said once she had calmed enough to speak again. This is beyond threats now, Alina. He put his hands on you. That is not something we simply let go. Alina nodded against his chest, too exhausted and shaken to argue, grateful beyond words that she did not have to make the decision alone. Over the following hour, they sat together in his car while the police took her statement, documenting the marks on her wrist, taking down every detail of what had happened, of the previous threats, of the pattern of behavior that had followed her for months. Alexander stayed beside her through all of it, his hand never leaving hers, steady and grounding in a way that made the ordeal bearable. "I am filing for a restraining order first thing tomorrow morning," Alexander said, as he finally drove her home much later that night, the city quiet and dark around them. "And I want you to stay somewhere safer than your apartment for the next few days, at least until we know he understands the seriousness of what just happened." "Alexander, I cannot just abandon my apartment because I am scared," Alina said, though the protest carried little real conviction, exhaustion and fear having worn down most of her resistance. "You are not abandoning anything," he said gently. "You are simply staying somewhere I know you will be safe for a few days while we sort this out properly. Please, Alina, let me do this for you." She looked over at him in the dim light of the car, at the tight, worried lines still etched across his face, the lingering fury he was visibly working to contain for her sake, and she felt the last of her resistance dissolve. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay, I will stay at your place just for a few days." Relief washed visibly over his features. "Thank you," he said, reaching over to squeeze her hand gently. "I promise you, Alina, this ends now. I am not going to let him anywhere near you again." That night, curled beneath unfamiliar blankets in one of the guest rooms of his townhouse, unable to fully quiet the adrenaline still humming faintly beneath her skin, Alina heard a soft knock at her door sometime past midnight. She opened it to find Alexander standing there, still fully dressed, clearly unable to sleep either. "I could not stop thinking about what almost happened tonight," he admitted quietly. "I am sorry, I did not mean to wake you. I only wanted to make sure you were all right." "I could not sleep either," Alina admitted. Without either of them fully deciding it, she found herself stepping aside, inviting him in, and they sat together on the edge of the bed in comfortable silence for a long while, his arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest, both of them listening to the quiet, steady rhythm of his heartbeat until sleep finally, gently, claimed them both. In the morning, Alina woke to soft gray light filtering through unfamiliar curtains, and for one disoriented moment, she forgot where she was. Then she felt the warmth beside her, Alexander still asleep, one arm curled protectively over her waist even in sleep, and she allowed herself, just for a moment, to simply lie there and feel safe, truly safe, in a way she had not felt in longer than she could remember. The restraining order was filed that morning, and within the week, formal charges were pressed against Derek for the physical altercation in the parking lot, corroborated by security footage from a nearby building that had captured the entire confrontation. Alina testified calmly and clearly about the pattern of behavior that had led to that night, and for the first time since she had left him nearly a year earlier, she felt something close to true closure settle over the fear that had followed her for so long. Derek did not contact her again. But even as one threat faded fully into the past, Alina could not shake the growing awareness that another, quieter one was still waiting patiently in the wings, one wearing an elegant silver twist of hair and a title far grander than her own, watching every step of their relationship with careful, unforgiving eyes. 2 months passed, and life, for the first time in as long as Alina could remember, began to feel steady in a way that almost frightened her with its unfamiliarity. Her business thrived, her fear of Derek finally, truly faded into the background of her life rather than looming over every decision, and her relationship with Alexander deepened into something so natural, so easy, that she sometimes forgot it had ever begun as a careful arrangement built on convenience rather than genuine feeling. They fell into small, quiet routines together. Sunday mornings spent at the farmer's market near her apartment, Alexander trailing behind her with an amused, patient expression, while she debated the merits of different flower varieties with vendors who had no idea they were speaking with a duke. Weeknight dinners at her small kitchen table instead of his grand dining room, because she had once mentioned offhand that his dining room made her feel like she was eating in a museum, and he had laughed and never suggested it again. Quiet evenings spent simply existing in the same space, him reading through estate reports while she sketched out seating charts, both of them comfortable enough in the silence to not need to fill it with constant conversation. It was during one of these quiet evenings, curled together on her small couch with a documentary playing unwatched in the background, that Alina finally found the courage to say the thing she had been carrying, carefully guarded, for weeks. "Can I tell you something?" she asked, turning to face him, her heart beating a little faster than the moment probably warranted. "Always," Alexander said, setting aside the papers he had been reviewing, giving her his full attention in the way he always did, as though nothing else in the world mattered more than whatever she was about to say. "I have been thinking about all of this," she said, gesturing vaguely between them, searching for the right words. "About us, about how it started and how it has become something so different than what either of us expected." She paused, gathering her courage. "I think I am falling in love with you, Alexander. I have been trying to talk myself out of it for weeks, because it feels almost too fast, too strange given how we met, but I cannot seem to stop feeling it anyway." For a long moment, Alexander said nothing, and Alina's stomach twisted with sudden fear that she had misread everything, that she had said too much, too soon, that the careful, easy warmth between them had somehow existed only in her own imagination. But then his expression softened into something so tender it took her breath away, and he reached out to gently cup her face in his hands. "Alina," he said quietly, "I fell in love with you the night you grabbed my arm and forgot to introduce yourself properly. I have simply been waiting, terrified, for the right moment to tell you, in case it was too soon, in case you were not ready to hear it." A surprised, disbelieving laugh escaped her, tears prickling unexpectedly at the corners of her eyes. "You have loved me since that first night. I have loved you since the moment you looked more concerned about apologizing to me than about the fact that I was a duke," he said, his thumb brushing gently across her cheek. "Everything since then has simply been confirmation of what I already suspected. I love you, Alina Marsh. Not the arrangement, not the appearance of a relationship for the sake of society. You. Completely and without any reservation." Alina closed the small distance between them and kissed him then, slow and certain, pouring every ounce of relief and joy and quiet disbelief into it. And Alexander pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her as though he intended to never let her go. They existed in that warm, golden certainty for exactly 11 days before the fragile peace shattered entirely. It began with a summons Alina had not expected, a formal invitation, more like a command, requesting her presence at the Duchess's private estate for what was described only as a family discussion. Alexander had been away that week, overseeing an urgent matter at one of the family's rural properties, and Alina, wanting to prove she could hold her own in his world without needing him to shield her from every difficult conversation, had accepted the invitation alone. She arrived to find not only the Duchess waiting for her in the estate's formal sitting room, but two other relatives Alina had only met briefly at prior events. A stern-faced uncle who oversaw the family's financial interests, and a cousin whose polished, cold smile did not reach her eyes. "Miss Marsh," the Duchess said, gesturing for Alina to take a seat across from the small gathered group, her tone formal and clipped in a way that immediately set Alina on edge. "Thank you for coming. I believe it is time we discuss the future of your relationship with my son, honestly and without pretense." "I'm happy to discuss it," Alina said, keeping her voice steady despite the growing unease coiling in her stomach. "Alexander is nearing an age where the family expects him to formalize his position, to marry, to secure the line and the alliances necessary to protect everything generations before him have built," the Duchess continued, her tone brisk and businesslike, as though discussing a corporate merger rather than her own son's heart. "There is a list, Miss Marsh, of women whose families have long-standing relationships with ours, women who understand the responsibilities that come with this world, who were raised specifically to carry them. You are not on that list, and I think you know exactly why." Alina felt heat rise in her cheeks, humiliation and anger tangling together. "With respect, Duchess, Alexander is a grown man capable of choosing who he wants to spend his life with. That choice does not belong to a list or to anyone in this room." "Perhaps not legally," the uncle interjected coolly, But practically, Miss Marsh, there are considerations far beyond romance at stake here. Trust structures, inheritance arrangements, the continued goodwill of families whose alliances have protected this estate for 2 centuries. A relationship built on a fabricated meeting at a charity gala, however charming the story, cannot simply override 200 years of careful strategy. It was not fabricated, Alina said, her voice sharpening despite her effort to remain composed. I did not plan any of this. I was frightened and Alexander helped me, and somewhere along the way we genuinely fell in love with each other. That is not a strategy, that is just what happened. The cousin's cold smile widened slightly. And how convenient that it happened to a duke, rather than an ordinary man of your own circumstances. The words landed like a slap, and Alina had to fight to keep her composure, refusing to let them see how deeply the implication cut. I did not fall in love with a title, she said quietly. I fell in love with a man who happened to have one. If that is difficult for this family to understand, I am sorry, but it does not make it any less true. The Duchess studied her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering behind her sharp gray eyes, so similar to her son's. Miss Marsh, she said finally, I do not doubt that your feelings for my son are genuine. What I doubt is whether genuine feeling is sufficient to withstand the pressures this life will place upon you. The scrutiny, the expectations, the endless comparisons to women who have spent their entire lives preparing for exactly this role. I have watched too many well-meaning relationships collapse under that weight to believe love alone will be enough. Then let us prove you wrong, Alina said, her voice steady now, fueled by a fierce determination she had not fully realized she possessed. Instead of deciding for us before we have even had the chance to try. I am afraid the decision is already partly made, the uncle said gravely. The family has voted, informally, to withdraw certain financial and social support for Alexander's public activities should this relationship continue publicly. It would be, shall we say, strongly discouraged for him to continue pursuing this particular attachment. Alina's blood ran cold. You are threatening him. Because of me. We are protecting an institution far larger than either of you, the Duchess said, though for the first time, something almost like reluctant sympathy flickered across her composed features. I am sorry, Miss Marsh, truly, but I love my son enough to protect what he has been entrusted to carry, even when he cannot see clearly enough to protect it himself. Alina left the estate that afternoon feeling as though the ground had shifted beneath her entirely, the fragile, golden certainty of the past 11 days now shadowed by a threat far more complicated and far harder to fight than anything Derek had ever thrown at her. She could not simply call the police on a family's disapproval. She could not file a restraining order against generations of expectation and tradition. She sat in her car outside the estate gates for a long time, staring blankly at the manicured hedges, wondering, with a heavy, sinking dread, whether the love she and Alexander had built together was strong enough to survive the weight the world was preparing to place upon it, or whether, in the end, some fears simply could not be outrun no matter how far or how fast a person tried to run. Alexander returned from his trip 2 days later to find Alina quieter than usual, careful in a way that immediately told him something significant had shifted while he was away. He found her sitting on her small couch, a cup of tea gone cold in her hands, staring at nothing in particular. What happened? He asked, sitting down beside her, his voice gentle but edged with concern. Alina told him everything, the summons to the estate, the calm, clinical way his mother and uncle and cousin had laid out their objections, the threat of withdrawn support hanging over his public activities, the quiet insistence that love alone would not be enough to withstand the weight of his world. Alexander's expression darkened with each detail, his jaw tightening, his hands curling into fists at his sides. They had no right to summon you without me, he said, his voice tight with barely restrained anger. None of this was their decision to make. Maybe not, Alina said quietly, but they made their position very clear regardless. Alexander, I do not want to be the reason your family turns against you. I do not want to be the reason you lose support you have spent your entire life building. You are not the reason for anything, Alexander said firmly, taking her hands in his. If my family cannot accept the woman I love, that is a failure on their part, not yours. It is not that simple, and you know it, Alina said, pulling her hands back gently, needing the space to think clearly. This is not just about their feelings, Alexander. It is about trust structures and alliances and centuries of expectation. I do not fully understand all of it, but I understand enough to know that I could genuinely cost you things that matter, things you have worked your whole life to protect. None of that matters more than you do, Alexander said, though there was a flicker of something uncertain beneath his fierce conviction, an awareness, perhaps, that the situation was more complicated than either of them wanted it to be. Doesn't it, though? Alina asked softly. You have responsibilities to people beyond just yourself, employees on your estates, charitable trusts that depend on family support to function, an entire legacy that is not really yours alone to risk. She took a shaky breath. I love you, Alexander. I have never loved anyone the way I love you. But I do not think I can be the reason you lose everything you have spent your life building. Alina, Alexander said, panic creeping into his voice for the first time since she had known him. What are you saying? I think, she said, her voice breaking despite her effort to remain steady, that maybe I do not belong in your world, no matter how much I wish I did. Maybe your mother is right, and love is not always enough to overcome everything standing in its way. Do not do this, Alexander said, his voice raw. Do not let my family convince you that you are not worthy of this life of me, simply because you were not born into it. That has never been true, and it never will be. I'm not doing this because of worthiness, Alina said, tears finally spilling over despite her efforts to hold them back. I am doing this because I am scared, Alexander. I'm scared of watching you slowly lose pieces of your life because of me, and resenting me for it eventually, even if you never say it out loud. I have spent enough of my life being someone's slow, quiet regret. I cannot do that again, not with you, not when I love you this much. Alexander reached for her, but she stepped back, needing the distance to keep from losing her resolve entirely. Please, she said softly. I think I need some time. I need to think away from all of this, away from your family's expectations and your title and everything that comes with it. I am sorry. She asked him to leave that evening, and though every part of her wanted to call him back the moment the door closed behind him, she forced herself to stay still, to sit with the heavy, aching silence of her small apartment, wondering whether she had just made the bravest decision of her life or the most foolish one. The following days passed in a haze of quiet misery. Alina threw herself into work, coordinating weddings and galas with mechanical efficiency, smiling politely at clients while feeling hollow underneath. Grace came by twice, sitting with her through long, quiet evenings, gently pushing back against the narrative Alina had built for herself. You did not fail him, Grace said one evening, sitting cross-legged on Alina's couch with a cup of tea she had made but not touched. You made a sacrifice out of love, which is different, even if it does not feel different right now. It feels like giving up, Alina admitted. Does it though? Or does it feel like protecting someone you love from a fight you are not sure he is prepared to have? Grace asked gently. Because those are two very different things, Alina, and I think you already know which one this actually is. Alina did not have an answer for that, not one she was ready to say out loud. Meanwhile, across the city, Alexander found himself unable to settle into any part of his usual routine, the quiet, steady rhythm of his days now feeling hollow and meaningless without Alina's presence woven through them. He sat alone in his study late one night, staring at the family portraits lining the walls, generations of Ashcombe dukes and duchesses gazing down at him with the same composed, unreadable expressions his mother wore so effortlessly. He thought about his father, who had died when Alexander was young, leaving him a title far too heavy for a boy who had not yet learned the weight of it. He thought about the years he had spent since then trying to be worthy of a legacy he had never truly chosen, following expectations laid out for him before he was even born, measuring every decision against the approval of people who valued strategy over happiness. And he thought about Alina, standing in a crowded ballroom months earlier, clinging to his arm without knowing or caring who he was, laughing at his dry jokes, correcting his manners at dinner, treating him, for the first time in his adult life, like a person rather than a position. He rose from his chair with sudden, fierce clarity and made his way to his mother's estate that same night, arriving unannounced, finding her still awake in her private sitting room, a book open unread in her lap. "Alexander," the Duchess said, setting the book aside, clearly surprised by the late hour and the intensity in her son's expression. "What is this about?" "I'm not choosing anyone from your list," Alexander said, his voice steady and unwavering. "I'm not going to let fear of losing support or standing dictate who I spend my life with. I love Alina, Mother, more than I have ever loved anyone, and I am done pretending that anything about this family's expectations matters more than that." The Duchess studied him for a long moment, something complicated moving behind her sharp gray eyes. "You would risk everything for her, the trusts, the alliances, everything your father built." "I would risk all of it," Alexander said without hesitation. "Because none of it means anything if I am not happy, and I have not been truly happy in longer than I can remember, not until Alina walked into my life and forgot to be impressed by any of this." For a long moment, silence stretched between them, heavy and uncertain. Then, slowly, something in the Duchess's rigid composure seemed to soften, just slightly, the ghost of an old memory flickering across her expression. "Your father once said something very similar to me," she said quietly, "the night he told his own family he intended to marry me, despite objections about my family's more modest standing. I had forgotten that until just now." She let out a slow, measured breath. "I do not know if I can promise you an easy path, Alexander. There will be resistance, difficulties, people who will not let go of old expectations easily. But I will not stand in your way any longer if this is truly what you want." Alexander felt something loosen in his chest, relief and gratitude tangling together. "Thank you, Mother." "Do not thank me yet," she said, a faint, rare smile touching her lips. "Go convince the girl first. From what I understand, she has already decided to let you go." Alina was closing up her office late on a rainy evening, exhausted from a day spent trying and failing to distract herself with work, when she heard the small bell above the door chime unexpectedly. She turned, expecting a forgotten delivery or a late client, and found Alexander standing in the doorway instead, soaked from the rain, his usually composed appearance disheveled in a way she had never seen before. "Alexander," she said, startled, her heart lurching painfully at the sight of him. "What are you doing here? It is late and it is pouring outside." "I could not wait any longer," he said, stepping fully inside, water dripping steadily from his hair and coat onto the floor, though he seemed entirely unbothered by it. "I needed to see you. I needed to say some things properly, without titles, without arrangements, without any of the noise that has been standing between us." Alina set down the papers she had been holding, her hands trembling slightly. "Alexander, I meant what I said. I do not want to be the reason you lose everything." "You will not be," he said, closing the distance between them. "I spoke with my mother. I told her without hesitation that I choose you fully and completely, regardless of what it costs me. And do you know what she said?" Alina shook her head, hardly daring to breathe. "She told me to come convince you, because apparently in her own words, she already knew I would choose you over every list she had ever compiled." A small, disbelieving laugh escaped him. "My mother, Alina. The same woman who summoned you to her estate to warn you away from me, essentially gave us her blessing, in her own complicated, difficult way." "She did that?" Alina asked, tears already gathering, disbelief and hope tangling together in her chest. "She did," Alexander confirmed, reaching out to gently take her hands in his, uncaring that his own were still cold and damp from the rain. "Alina, I do not care about lists or alliances or centuries of careful strategy. I care about you. I have cared about nothing else, not really, since the night you grabbed my arm in a crowded ballroom and forgot to ask my name first. I do not want a life built on obligation and expectation. I want a life built with you, whatever that costs, however difficult the path might be." "I was so scared," Alina admitted, her voice breaking. I was scared of costing you everything you have worked your whole life to protect. I was scared of becoming someone's quiet regret again. You could never be my regret, Alexander said fiercely, cupping her face gently in his hands. You are the first genuinely good thing that has happened to me in longer than I can remember. Please, Alina, do not let fear convince you to walk away from something real simply because it might be difficult. I promise you, whatever difficulties come, we will face them together, not apart. Alina searched his face for a long moment, taking in the raw, unguarded sincerity there, the same steady warmth she had trusted from the very first night they met, when he had lifted his glass without hesitation and shielded her from a threat he did not even understand yet. Whatever fear still lingered in her chest slowly began to dissolve beneath the overwhelming certainty of what she felt for him, real and unshakable despite every obstacle that had tried to break it. I love you, she said softly. I have loved you for weeks now, and I do not think I ever really stopped, not even when I asked you to leave. I love you too, Alexander said, his voice thick with emotion. More than I know how to properly express. She rose on her toes and kissed him then, slow and certain, rain still dripping from his coat onto the floor around them, neither of them caring in the slightest. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and smiling, Alexander rested his forehead gently against hers. Come home with me, he said quietly. Not because you need protection, not because of any arrangement. Simply because I want to fall asleep every night knowing you are safe beside me, and wake up every morning grateful that you are still there. Alina laughed softly, wiping at her damp eyes. That sounds like a very roundabout proposal, Your Grace. It is not a proposal, Alexander said, a slow, warm smile spreading across his face. Not yet. But give me time, Alina Marsh. I intend to ask you properly when the moment is right, and I intend for you to say yes. I might, she teased, though her heart was already certain of the answer. 6 months later, Alina stood once again in a grand ballroom, this time not as an event coordinator checking seating charts, and not as a frightened woman fleeing a dangerous past, but as a guest of honor at a charity gala hosted by the very family who had once tried to keep her away. The Duchess, standing nearby in quiet conversation with several guests, caught Alina's eye across the room and offered a small, genuine nod of acknowledgement, a silent truce that had slowly, over months of careful effort on both sides, grown into something resembling real respect. Alexander found her near the same pillar where they had first met, and for a moment they simply stood together, remembering. Do you know, he said quietly, I think about that night constantly. The way you grabbed my arm without any idea who I was. Best decision either of us ever made. I still cannot believe you just went along with it, Alina said, laughing softly. How could I not? Alexander said, reaching into his jacket pocket, his expression suddenly shifting into something more serious, more nervous than she had seen from him in a long time. Alina, I have been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment, and I think, standing here in exactly the spot where we first met, this might be it. Alina's breath caught as he lowered himself carefully onto one knee, the small velvet box in his hand catching the light of the chandeliers overhead. Around them, the ballroom slowly quieted, guests turning to watch, though Alina barely registered any of it. Her entire focus narrowed to the man kneeling before her, his gray eyes steady and full of love. Alina Marsh, Alexander said, his voice carrying clearly despite the tremor of emotion beneath it. You walked into my life by accident, and you have stayed in it by choice, through every difficulty this strange world has thrown at us. I do not want to imagine a single day of my future without you beside me. Will you marry me? Tears spilled freely down Alina's cheeks as she nodded, unable to find her voice for a long moment. Yes, she finally managed, laughing through her tears. Yes, of course, yes. Alexander rose and swept her into his arms, kissing her as the ballroom erupted into applause around them, the string quartet shifting seamlessly into something joyful and celebratory. Alina laughed against his lips, overwhelmed with a happiness so complete it nearly took her breath away, and as she looked out over the crowd of smiling faces, She thought back to the terrified young woman who had once fled across this very room, desperate for any shelter from her past. She had found so much more than shelter that night. She had found a home. The wedding took place the following spring, in the gardens of the same estate where Alina had once sat trembling in her car, unsure whether her love could survive the weight of the world she was marrying into. This time, she stood beneath an arch of white flowers she had helped design herself, surrounded by family and friends who had watched her rebuild her life piece by piece, and by a family who had once doubted her but now welcomed her with genuine warmth. The Duchess, standing near the front row in an elegant pale gray dress, dabbed quietly at her eyes throughout the ceremony, and afterward she pulled Alina aside for a private moment among the celebrations. "I owe you an apology," the Duchess said, her voice softer than Alina had ever heard it. "I judged you before I truly knew you, based on fears that had little to do with who you actually are. Watching you these past months, watching how you have cared for my son, how you have handled every difficulty with more grace than most people born into this world ever manage, I understand now how wrong I was to doubt you." "Thank you," Alina said, genuinely touched, "for trusting him enough in the end to let him choose his own path. He is happier than I have seen him since before his father passed," the Duchess admitted. "That is worth more than any list I ever compiled." Grace, standing nearby with a glass of champagne and an expression of barely contained delight, leaned in to whisper as the Duchess walked away. "Did the Duchess of Ashcombe just apologize to you? At your own wedding?" "She did," Alina said, still slightly stunned. "I told you this would end in a wedding story," Grace said triumphantly, pulling her into a tight hug. "I am so happy for you, Alina. After everything you have been through, you deserve every bit of this happiness." As the celebrations continued late into the evening, string lights glowing warmly across the garden, and laughter drifting through the cool spring air, Alina found a quiet moment alone with Alexander near the edge of the garden, away from the noise of the party. "Any regrets?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they looked out over the softly lit grounds. "Only that I did not grab your arm sooner," Alina teased, leaning back against him. Alexander laughed, pressing a soft kiss to the top of her head. "I am glad you grabbed it when you did. Every difficult moment since then has been worth reaching this one." In the months that followed, Alina's business flourished beyond anything she had imagined. Her reputation not only fully restored but strengthened. Her work now sought after by clients drawn to both her talent and the quiet, remarkable story of resilience behind her. She used a portion of her growing success to establish a small fund, quietly and without fanfare, offering support to women rebuilding their lives after difficult relationships. The kind of support she wished she had known was available during her own hardest months. Derek, as far as Alina ever learned, moved to another city entirely after his legal troubles concluded, and she never heard from him again. The fear he had once held over her slowly faded into a distant memory, overshadowed entirely by the life she had built in its place. A life full of genuine love, hard-won trust, and the quiet, steady happiness she had once believed was reserved for other people. Years later, when their own daughter asked how her parents had met, Alina would tell the story exactly as it happened: the crowded ballroom, the desperate grab for a stranger's arm, the startling discovery that the stranger was a duke. Their daughter never tired of hearing it, always laughing at the same part, always asking the same question at the end. "And you really did not know he was a duke, Mama?" "Not until it was much too late," Alina would say, smiling at Alexander across the room, the same warm, steady love still glowing between them after all the years that had passed. "But by then, it did not matter who he was at all. It only mattered who he had chosen to be for me." And every single time, without fail, Alexander would catch her eye across the room and smile. The same quiet, unshakable warmth he had offered her that very first night, when a frightened stranger had clung to his arm and found, entirely by accident, the beginning of the rest of her life.